And we're here, live,
And
not in
live.
person. Remote
Hey,
today.
gentlemen, how you doing?
Hello, hello.
Living the dream.
Happy
Yes,
Wednesday, May
sir.
11th. This is our first time having all four of us on, I think, at the same time, so that's pretty
That's
exciting.
right.
That's right.
It
Yeah,
is.
The
we
security
filled out
squad
the
is growing.
yeah, we finally filled out the screen here, so there's no
We're
black space in between all
officially
our
Brady
images.
Bunch.
Yeah,
Yeah, we need
exactly.
a few more for that.
It's getting
Right.
Well,
closer.
Hollywood
we'll see how
Squares.
it goes. We'll see how it goes. So yeah, we got a couple interesting articles today, this week, and some interesting stories. And I think we're going to take a little bit different approach on this one and kind of see how the format goes. And again, viewers, if you're kind of watching, tell us what you think, and happy to kind of take feedback and ideas as we kind of move forward and tweak and tune here and kind of give everybody the best possible content experience. So we'll see how this one goes. So I don't know, Jordan, since you're kind of our newest security squad member, do you want to maybe kick it off with one of the articles that you kind of found and liked?
Sure, definitely. Ransomware and more importantly, Wiperware, which is the destructive sibling of ransomware, has been something I've been researching and reporting on for years. So it was pretty interesting to me to find out recently that the Five Eyes nations, US, UK, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, have basically come out, along with the European Union and Ukraine, attributing a series of cyber attacks in and around Ukraine to Russia. So pretty clear that they have the evidence that these attacks have been perpetrated by Russia. But more interesting to me is what are these attacks and what's actually going on there. So basically, we found out that the Viasat outage, which was in February, is actually a part of used for Ukrainian infrastructure. Primary target was probably the Ukrainian military, but as a result of this attack, since it hit Viasat, knocked it out, there were other residential and commercial internet users that were knocked out. Apparently, there were wind farms in Central Europe, so apparently that's outside of Ukraine there. And there were some researchers over at Sentinel-1 who have discovered the piece of malware that they are comparing to VPN Filter. And VPN Filter is one that's been going around the web for quite a few years now. I think 2018 was when it really started taking over something like 500,000 routers worldwide. And so this is pretty similar, attacking the modems within homes and small offices in the US, but now this variant, which is dubbed Acid Rain, has been hitting modems, Viasat customers, as well as other pieces of infrastructure that are used locally in that area. And it was pretty interesting to find out that the initial access there was through a VPN, which was, I guess, hosted on the modem or had access to the modem. So by exploiting the VPN, they were able to gain access to a large number of residential modems simultaneously because they had basically management control of that network. And then they actually were able to overwrite some of the flash memory that was on those modems, making them inoperable, making them not able to connect to the network. And so it's not totally clear to me. There was discussion of how this is similar to other Wiperware and its destructive commands that overwrote the flash memory, but it didn't actually destroy them, make them permanently unusable. Basically, they could flip the config back to what it was before. And that leads into Starlink and Tesla executive Elon Musk commenting that he also was recognizing cyber attacks coming from Russia. Some people may know that Starlink is an internet service provider delivered by satellite, and that was deployed in Ukraine in support of their ongoing war there. And so when that was also attacked, Elon Musk and some other representatives have said that they were able to implement a fix, basically push out a new line of code, reconfigure something to deflect that attack. But even that was inoperable pretty quickly. So the escalation, the back and forth, the intensity of the changes here, it's actually being commented on by the Secretary of Defense of the United States. So the Office of Secretary of Defense, Director of Electronic Warfare, David Tremper, said that they were impressed with how quickly the initial attacks were repelled, but then did go on to say that that fix was overcome. And so describing it as an interesting case study and how the military could learn from how quickly Starlink worked to address that problem, and that's emphasizing that the U.S. military and our allies need to have that same kind of agility. And I think that there are also lessons that we can learn here in the corporate world about our businesses and our operations needing to be maintained. If we have downtime, if we are knocked offline, we, our customers, anybody who's doing business, that's a critical issue. So being able to be resilient, being able to respond to attacks and put things back up when you get hit is going to be critical, especially in the world that we're moving into.
So Jordan, would you kind of consider this like a supply chain type of attack, or is it kind of not classified as something like that?
In a way, it's kind of more like like a service provider attack. So you're destroying. If you kind of think of like the rail network being really critical to a nation's infrastructure, if you're able to knock out some of the hubs of that infrastructure, that's kind of similar to what we have here. So now all those nodes can't connect and perform their transactions, perform their communications, and that's going to hamper both the military as well as commercial and residential enterprises there.
Yeah, and I understand that there were some requests made of Elon to send over the terminals following, or send over some replacement terminals to support their communications following the Wiper malware incident with Viasat. And as a result, I think there are about 150,000 active users that are currently using that rapid response deployment from Musk. So
Yeah.
like what do you think about that kind of you just were alluding to it, like what do you think about that collaboration between government geopolitics and the private industry, right? They're leaning on private organizations to do this more rapidly than global governments. So what are kind of thoughts on that? Is that like a trend we'll see moving forward because of the specialization that they bring to the table?
This was a situation where their local infrastructure was being hampered, and there was another alternative which could be deployed pretty rapidly. So that's the good thing about commercial enterprise in this world primarily, is that it's a little bit more agile there. And Ukraine clearly appreciates it. The Prime Minister of Digital Transformation in Ukraine, Mr. Fedorov, was saying that this is a crucial support for their infrastructure. And if they're going to be restoring the deployed territories, it's critical to that effort as well. So I think that it makes sense that other nations or other organizations could be finding themselves in a situation where they need to deploy a secondary internet service provider. And from an incident response redundancy kind of situation, it's really good to have those plans in place ahead of time and not have to go tweet out to Elon Musk and hope that he responds to your tweet. If you have a redundancy plan, a recovery plan that's not just on paper, but is being practiced, is being implemented like as a fire drill every once in a while to make sure that everybody knows what to do. Because you never want to find yourself in the middle of a firefight and then go, oh yeah, where's my tools? Where's my equipment? Who am I talking to? What's the phone number?
Right.
Oh shoot, my email systems are down. I don't have access to my contacts. I don't have access to my phones anymore. So what's your backup for your phones? What's your backup for your emails? What's your backup for actually conducting transactions and getting internet connectivity? Do you have those relationships on hand, and do you have paper copies of them ready to go in case your AD gets disconnected or you completely lose internet network access? Those things are lessons that can definitely be learned from incidents like this.
Yeah, that's why I have 3 different internet service providers, or access to 3 different ones that are always on and ready to go if I need them. So I'm kind of curious from the aspect, so, satellite removes the need for a cable, if you will. You can get solar to power that, so you can fully be detached in that scenario, but the ground communications are still some of the fastest lower latency. So can this ransomware be used in other types of communication attacks as well, not just the satellites?
Certainly, this is something that's going after the modems that the service providers were connected to. I haven't gotten details exactly on what Starlink was dealing with, so that may not be exactly the same type of cyber attack. But the point there being that they were also attacked and were able to repel it and are currently engaged with that kind of situation. But VPN filter, apparently this new flavor of that kind of destructive ransomware or wiperware, it's definitely spreads. And like we saw with the NotPetya in, I think it was 2018, that's it spread beyond its intended targets. We're already seeing spillover. So it's always a good idea in situations like this that organizations around the world need to have their shields up.
Yep. Sorry, I said ransomware, but it's wiperware, and that's even worse, in my opinion, because there is no key to unlock it.
Right.
Yeah, it's
Right.
just purely like destructive, right? The goal is to just literally blow out the configs, make these things, dumb boxes, so to speak. And in some cases, I think, Jordan, you were saying, in this case, it was done in a way that it wasn't, bricked or, locked out so they could physically reflash it or reflash it digitally. But in some cases, these things become just literally dumb boxes and locked out. And you have to physically replace it, I think, right?
Yep. Yeah, that's certainly possible. And if you on some systems, recovering the flash is just much more challenging. And so in terms of recovery and remediation, your best options might be to deploy new equipment.
Yeah, I think we've all had days, at least for me, from my old Cisco days, of losing the flash and having to like X modem something over that was 25 megs, and it's like, well, come back in 14 hours and like maybe it's done, So yeah, good times.
I'd rather not be doing that in a war field, battlefield.
Definitely not.
Don't do it at 1200 baud, right? You got to bump it up a little bit, maybe 14.4 or something.
Sometimes you don't have a choice, or sometimes there is no choice on that one.
Right.
Awesome.
Back in my day, we'd have to input it with Morse code. No, I'm just kidding.
There you go, right?
Exactly.
Smoke signal.
Well, I mean, another thing is like glass half full. Maybe it's not bad sometimes to have wiperware hit. I can think of a network, Derek, that we both supported at one point in time or troubleshot. That would not be bad to just have it start all over,
fresh.
Right?
Yeah, sometimes hit the big red reboot button.
Oh man.
Burn it to the ground and start over.
This is some dangerous philosophy here, boys. Sort of shades of early 2000s.
I know.
But
sometimes
are going to start flying over.
You got to look at the bright side that it's not always bad to have to start over in some scenarios.
Well, okay, like not to kind of derail this, but like that's a good point, right? Let's say you have 30 years of technical debt in a company, right? Legacy systems, you can't patch them, they're unsupported. At a certain point, you have to kind of say, look, we have to almost start over and reinvent ourselves and moving towards this modern era. And sometimes it's hard for people to like let go of that, right? So sometimes I'm not saying like destructively do it, but sometimes a
catalyst event,
reboot, if you will, is kind of what it takes.
It kind of parlays into another topic that we were talking about offline here about Lincoln College in Illinois, a 125-year-old institution. Anybody have anything to add to that?
Oh yeah, I can chat about that one a little bit. So basically it's a college that survived many different challenges, all the way from an economic crisis from 1887, a major campus fire that they had in 1912. We're back in another pandemic now, but the Spanish flu in 1918, the Great Depression, World War II, and the 2008 global financial crisis. And I think the most interesting thing of Lincoln College here is that they were at record-breaking enrollment in the fall of 2019. They were at maximum capacity. But unfortunately, in December of 2021, they hit a cyber attack, and that hindered them from being able to access all their institutional data, and they weren't able to get enrollment, recruitment, retention, and fundraising efforts. And all of those things really hurt them. And if you trace back to an article that was published in April 13th of 2022, they were looking for $50 million of a donor, and they don't really say why in that article. Now it's clear that the systems were down and they needed the funding, but it was about 1,000 students. And I think a couple of things come to mind here. So one, with the pandemic, they probably weren't able to pivot to online very easily because it's a rural college, smaller enrollment. They probably didn't have the online systems. It was probably more paper driven on the academia side, not the administrative side, but the academia side. So it was hard for them to do that. And then they had limited funds, obviously, to back up and restore. And then trying to acquire gear in December of 2021, if you want to do a recovery, you could be 6 months, a year out before you get the hardware in to even be able to attempt to do a recovery. And then we don't even know how much a ransomware was being asked for. But as we all know, if you go and run those encryption files while that system's running live, you can do more damage to it. Even if you get the key, you won't be able to get some of those databases back because they're now corrupt, right? The underlying operating system was ripped out of them, if you will, while it was running. So I think it's very interesting to see something this long with that much tenure and all the other adverse events that they've been able to survive and live through, and then ultimately between the pandemic and not probably being digitally ready, because if you can't recover from it, I'd have to make some assumptions there that you probably were missing some critical steps there, and then the not being able to get the funding right from that
1-2
piece of
punch.
it. Yep.
And resilience is what is resilience? Resilience is the ability to take a hit and keep on going. That's why submarines and aircraft carriers are built with multiple locations in their hulls. So if they take a hit, they can still keep on moving. And so that's so critical for an organization to keep on going. And it's such a tragedy that this 125-year-old institution that, like you said, had been through so much, this double whammy really knocked them out.
It
Yeah,
did.
it's kind of showing like the state of cyber and technology, and what it really means in today's world, right? And you have to be digitally ready, IT ready, whatever terminology you want to use, digital transformation. There's so many acronyms out there around this, but it really is true, right? If your business can't pivot and change and adapt in this new kind of modern work from anywhere, school from anywhere, just be anywhere type of environment, you're going to really struggle out there, right? And just, I think, Brian, to your point, like we talked about a lot of these things on the show, a lot is got to have a lot of these basics in place, right? Like, did they have backups? Were they actually testing backups? Were the backups off site? This is kind of almost the same thing in a way of saying, hey, if the college really did burn down, could we perform operations, right? Similar to something like that. So it just shows how important, technology is. It's not going to go anywhere. We're only getting more hyper connected, and to see, like you said, cyber and a ransomware, along with maybe a couple other things like the pandemic and whatnot, take down this large or this long-term institution is an interesting way to look at things for sure.
Yeah,
It is.
it's kind of interesting circling back to what you were mentioning before about scorching earth and starting anew. I think this organization, this or this institute's like experience and age actually hindered it in this situation, or actually was to its detriment. In many cases, having that much experience would be beneficial, but I think in this environment, like you alluded to earlier, Derek, the technical debt here, the requirements for digitally transforming their environment was probably immense compared to an organization that started off in the cloud and has most of their customer data and student data in there. So for them, I imagine, and one of the comments that Jordan and I like to say off air sometimes is we say, building the machine while it's running, or building the car while it's running, trying to improve or innovate your security infrastructure while also operating under the pre-existing SOPs that are probably paper-based is very difficult to do, especially if you still have, with an organization like this, not only do you have a lot of legacy systems, but you probably have a lot of legacy mindsets.
Right.
And so the politics of that is a lot more difficult to navigate through. So they're almost at a disadvantage from starting off so long ago. So whereas and so innovate or die, right? I think for them, a scorch earth type of policy here, where they kind of just rebuild as if it's a brand new infrastructure separate from their previous, and then work on migration, over however long of a period of time that they need, I think is a better approach than trying to transform their previous infrastructure. So that may be been a big part of what's going on here, and what a lot of other older organizations can kind of look to is having a sister or a duplicate environment that's modernized and with adequate security controls as opposed to their previous ones. So
Yep. I
Yeah,
worked out of college back in 2000, and it blew my mind when I discovered this, that there was a Class B public address space that they had. So it's tons of addresses, right? And so they had every single device had a public IP address assigned to it. Oh, and by the way, there was no firewall.
Right. That's
at
how
all.
things used to be done. And they
Yeah.
And
just kept
that's
on doing it that way.
exactly how it was
Yep.
done. And it was
Right.
never changed until that particular higher body over them said, oh, we need all these IP addresses back.
Yeah.
Then that
Arian, I
forced
think
the
that,
change.
yeah. ARIN, the nonprofit that manages IP addresses. At that time, they were the only users. It was universities
Yeah.
and government institutions. So,
Yep.
and if there isn't, this was probably started before they really split off the networking from internal and external. So we just
Hmm.
needed to have every device had a its own address space. So there's definitely a lot of legacy kind of systems there. And getting back to resiliency a little bit, one point that I want to highlight is that identifying your most business critical area within your organization, like that one area that if this went out, we can't do a business anymore, right? Focus, identify that and focus on that. If you can shield and improve that, you can grow from there. But like that has to be number one. And if you're in a situation where you don't have a router and you don't have firewalls, that might be your number one.
Right.
Triage and segmentation. We talk about it all the time, and it's like, well, identify, asset
Where's the button?
management.
I gotta hit the button.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Honestly, but in this situation, it's going to be more true because if you have a giant technical debt, to look at the whole mountain is daunting, and then to put a number on that is, I imagine, is just not budget friendly for most organizations. So you kind of have to go through the process of minimizing that scope, and then you can move. You find that security is a lot more feasible financially. So I think a lot of it just comes down to asset management as well. Like, who is the person that understands the where the data and the environment moves, and how it's stored, and what are the controls around it. So yeah, it's difficult to maintain resilience if you don't have clear identification of your most critical assets and networks.
So being in IT for so long and being that operational mindset, you don't often remember like what is that critical thing. So one of my pieces of advice is go to the CFO and ask, how do we make our money? Where's the majority of that come from, if you will? And then you can backtrack into, oh, these are our most critical assets. These things support us making that type of money. Because one of the employers I was at, 80% of their revenue came from one particular line of business, and there were about 7 critical systems out of the 100 and something systems we had that were critical to make that function. So we focused there first. So it's okay to ask questions. Go to the other people in the business if you don't know the answers. Like if you're not publicly traded, you probably don't have all the financials quickly accessible there. So anyways.
Yep. We could spend hours talking about that stuff, Brian. Like we always say, you got to know what your crown jewels are, where they are, and all that good stuff. So the mayor's in town. Just kidding.
Speaking of crown jewels, I heard that there was a critical asset at a bar. That's
Yeah,
being
this story is interesting to me. I kind of read this one, and it made me kind of shake my head a little bit in a few ways. So I want to kind of go through it. So there's a bar over in the DC area that lost about $200,000 in a cyber attack. First off, the bar has a really cool name called Johnny Pistolas. I thought was pretty awesome. So, but yeah, it looks like they lost nearly about $500,000 after someone hacked into their business-related bank accounts and carried out fraudulent transfers. So right off the bat, we have business email compromise, we have some potential wire fraud. So not really a typical ransomware style attack like we're used to seeing and what Brian was referencing, but still a very relevant attack. And if you read the article, there it is, clear as day. There was a phishing attack, said one of the owners, right, whose family owns the business. Hackers were able to access our accounts and perform, it looks like about 25 or so fraudulent wire transactions across 5 different business accounts. Transactions happened around end of the year, so December 31st, December 30th timeframe. Lots of money to a small business, right? I mean, every little bit helps, and as someone who runs a business and kind of manages that stuff, it's kind of sickening, right? If that happened to you and what it can mean. And the article even says like your stomach kind of drops to the floor, right? It's definitely a big shock. Kind of keep going here. So it sounds like they were able to recover about $200,000 or so of the money. Doesn't really explain kind of through what means. but says the bank has ended their investigation. They're looking into legal options. But here's kind of where I want to kind of target and kind of focus on, because I think this is where it gets interesting. The bank talks about, we have multiple layers of safeguards to protect our customers from fraud, including prompts, the user experience, how they identify red flags, things like that. But here where it says is the owner of the bar said his family blames the actual bank itself, claiming that it didn't do anything to stop the fraudulent transfers once they started. So it's
That's a shame.
a little bit of interesting twist, right? So if I kind of pose this question back to the team, who's really at fault here? Is it the person that had their account hacked? Is it the bank? Is it, obviously, like the threat actors are really to blame here, right? But I think what I'm getting at is, like, are we seeing now people trying to kind of blame others for maybe a lack of cyber knowledge or best practices in place, things of that nature. So it just kind of struck me as interesting that obviously they're probably frustrated and really bummed that this happened, but I don't know if blaming the bank is really the right play in some regard
Well,
here.
Derek, do we know who received the phishing email? Was it the bank or was it the business?
Most likely it was the business. That doesn't say clearly, but when you
Right.
read the article, it sounds like as if there was a phishing attack. So to me, that tells me that the family or the owners of the bar in question were the victims of the phishing attack,
Right.
aka business email compromise, which sadly we see a lot. I mean, we talk to a lot of customers. This has happened to people that we know and have talked to and worked through, and we see a lot around this, right? And it's interesting because even from like this type of perspective, right? This is, yes, it's an IT problem to scan for phishing and train your users and do MFA and do what's best practices, but still at the end of the day, it's a accounting operation practice as well. As what do you have in place to warrant against wire transfers? Who can do wire transfers? Who has access to these bank accounts? How much money do you keep in your bank accounts? There are certain things you can do as best practices, like, hey, don't keep all your money in accounts that can send money. You want to keep only incoming funds in certain accounts, and how you kind of manage your banking records and things like that. But we've also seen a larger sophistication in some of our clients that have really complicated um, process around who can sign for what. And we've seen cases where threat actors know the order of operations. They know, oh, person A signs to 50, person B signs to 200, person C signs to $1 million, and they can spoof the right chain of command, so to speak, to make it look like it goes through. But in a smaller operation like this, it's probably one person that doesn't maybe check it all the time. There's no maybe Q&A and balance and things like that. So it's really unfortunate. But again, it kind of just shows the rampant rise. And, again, it starts with a potential phishing email. And we say all the time, it just takes like one click to, gain access in some of these cases. And unfortunately, this costs money in the other way. Like, I'm not sure what's worse, right? Having ransomware, having to pay somebody and you're losing all the business because you can't operate, or almost like having this money just like literally stolen from your account, underneath you. So I'm not sure which
Well,
is worse. They
a
probably both feel
couple
terrible.
things there. There are ways that you can claw back some of the money. First of all, immediately contact the bank. If anyone finds out that they are a victim of wire transfer fraud, bank account compromise, or anything like that, immediately contact your financial institution. If the wire transfer is still in process, even if it's transferred to another bank, but that bank is still within your national system here in the US, there's a US national banking system that connects many of the banks. That still can be reversed. And so they were able to recover about 200,000 of it. That tells me that some of it was probably transferred to an overseas bank or something like that. So that's really good that they did that. As far as the scenario of how this happened, okay, an initial phishing email came into the victim organization who does banking with this institution. From there, there's a couple possibilities. Maybe the attackers compromised accounts or spoofed accounts, and then on behalf of the customer, made the fraudulent requests. Or the other potential is that they enticed or phished, social engineered the business to conduct a wire transfer, which the request thereof was not legitimate for. So as far as the liability or the who's culpable for this issue here, I think in my mind, without much more information about how this actually occurred, I think it would kind of come down to one of those two sides. But I also think that a really good point was brought up earlier that, for example, if the situation was that the bank isn't at fault and the responsibility there, it is a shared responsibility model in some sense, but if more of the liability falls on the customer there to manage their own security and not fall for these scams and then allow a transaction to occur there, that doesn't mean that the bank shouldn't be trying to educate their customers,
Of course, yeah.
put warnings and clear labeling, informing customers as they're making wire transfers or as they're making conducting business here. Hey, look out for these kinds of scams because they are becoming so common now. I can give a personal anecdote that I recently needed to deposit cash into my online bank account, and my institution doesn't have a lot of local locations. So I did that through a third party where I had to give them the cash, they take it, and then submit it to my bank. And there's a warning that I have to go through right there on the screen telling me about things like lottery scams, IRS scams, and things like that. Obviously, there's not much detail there, but if you're going through and you're submitting your transfer and you see that warning and it says something, maybe that will help your customer there. And in any case, if you help protect your customer or help your customer protect themselves, that's always going to protect you too.
Yeah, we always kind of talk about that trust but verify mentality, especially when there's money involved in transfers. And I had an interesting experience like you. I had to do a wire transfer recently for something, and like it even says like when they sent me the email for the instructions, they purposely don't put the routing numbers in the email anymore. It's like, hey, go to our website. They don't actually link it. They say, click, call, get the number from our main website, call us to verify, versus saying, hey, no, here's my number, put this in, double check it. So even like there are things like you're saying that the institutions can do to help combat this, but it is something that's growing, sadly more and more, right?
Yeah. So I know a couple of things around this for sure. So I think oftentimes there's a instance where it was $160,000 done in a business email compromise that I worked a little while ago, and it was determined the customer didn't have multi-factor authentication. They didn't check that they had the money cleared or whatnot or received on the other side for over 60 days. So they never got the title to the property that they were buying with that money or whatever the case was. And so that's what finally triggered them to look into it. Well, what happened, right? Like everything closed, the money came out of my account. Well, the receiver never received the money and they never said anything about it. And so it took too long and they only got $28,000 back in that particular instance because the mule had been able to move the money around at that point. And that's all that was left back to get. So I think the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency regulates banks that cross multiple state lines, and you have credit unions, and then you have state charter banks. I think all three of those categories need to start looking into the baseline cybersecurity things that customers should have in place before allowing them to do these digital transfers. So if you don't have multi-factor authentication, you don't have a two-process thing in place, you can't do a wire transfer. I think we really need to step it to that level at this point in time to reduce this type of fraud because it's just not going to go away. And I'm a big advocate of CMMC, the cybersecurity maturity model, for level 1 for everyone, because it has the base controls in place that everybody should have. And it doesn't mean it costs a lot of money to roll these controls out either. If you're already paying for Office 365, MFA is included. You just got to turn it on. In fact, it is turned on all new tenants that get deployed moving forward. So I just think there's a lot of things out there that customers just don't know. A lot of them have legacy configurations and setups, and that's maybe not all the modern auth or modern security is enabled on those things.
Yeah.
Speaking of modern authentication,
I was going to say, yes, you brought up MFA. I think this would be a good time to talk about the recent announcement from some of the big tech giants, as well as the FIDO Alliance and the World Wide Web Consortium. So in a press release, I think last Thursday, there was basically, they announced a joint support for creating a modern authentication solution for passwordless security. And so this is actually this is really an expansion of the standards-based capabilities that we've seen in the past. This is the FIDO Alliance and the FIDO protocol actually has already existed, but they're really expanding on the features and capabilities here. So, hundreds of companies, tech companies around the world have been working with FIDO and the W3C to create this standard on billions of devices and browsers. And recently, actually, for those who don't know, essentially what the FIDO protocol is a protocol that allows users to sign in for the same action that they take, while signing into their mobile device using biometric security, Face ID, thumb scanning, anything of that nature. In some cases, even device pinning, to basically use that to access or to provide authentication to various websites and applications without the use of legacy multi-factor technologies or passwords at all. You just public key cryptography to do this. And so, without having to use without having to use your own private key pair, the device itself stores the private key. And then you're able to then use that device-based private key to authenticate to the various applications that support the FIDO protocol. What's crazy about the most recent release is the collaboration between the three organizations. They're basically stating that this should be available across all devices and platforms. That means, Apple and Android. So it's very cool to see that. In my opinion, this is a huge step in the world of password security, as we're seeing major vendors come together, put aside the differences for the sake of security. Right? It's especially for Apple, to be quite honest, to comply with this and not try and create their own protocol that or their own version of this standard. It's great to see them work together. That way, the real issue here, why this hasn't been more widely adopted before, is the ease of use. So with today's announcement and why it's such a big deal, basically this should allow users to automatically access their FIDO sign-in credentials on many of their devices, even new ones, without having to re-enroll their accounts. Before, you basically had to enroll every single application for every single device. So it was very cumbersome, and that's why it wasn't really widely adopted. Now, we enable users with the FIDO authentication protocol to sign in on an Apple website, regardless of the device, OS, or browser or platform they're running. So huge step in mass adoption. Because as you know, if it's not simple to use, we're not going to use it. And so, pretty big step here as we see three major tech giants come together to commit to implementing this into each of their products by the end of starting by the end of the year. We'll probably see the efforts continue to roll out for the next several years, and even start to see standardizing bodies start to require these for certain tiers of service providers and vendors and whatnot, and government agencies. But at the very least, this is great, pretty great news and big news in the world of password security.
Yeah, in fact, last week was National Password Day, or International Password Day, and I propose that we change that to International Passwordless Day,
Right.
if we can
like
move towards this world.
There you go.
I'm curious, what are the requirements to implement FIDO? Is this something that's enabled because most modern devices have a dedicated TPM module, a security module that's dedicated specifically to encryption and authentication?
Yeah, so I'm guessing it'll either work, and of course, I think the more documentation will roll out as to the way the protocol is implemented for each vendor. Some, I believe, will probably use a dedicated hardware device like a TPM, but some may actually leverage certain aspects of the device that already exists to kind of sign via the public
So
key.
it's not necessarily limited to the most modern devices. It may be also backwards compatible for older devices too.
Yes, and actually, that is already kind of the current state of it. This is already actually compatible with many devices and sites. But the problem is again, as I was mentioned earlier, it's very cumbersome to actually enroll each device for each application. So you just don't see it offered or enabled by default. But to your point, yes, I think this standard has been developed, before, or has been in the theory has been in development since prior to the mass adoption of TPMs. So I'm assuming there are multiple methodologies for implementation of the private key function.
So this kind of also then now shows how important your digital device is going to be to you, your digital life, right? I mean, it's already stressful enough, like if you lose your phone or something, and like just imagine like if you can't even log into anything because you don't have your phone, right? So just going to be like more relevant. Like, okay, now you back your phone up. Maybe some people are carrying two phones at some point. I mean, it's going to be a little crazy in some of these situations, but yeah, I can see the appeal of getting rid of passwords, so to speak, because we've been talking about this for in the industry for many, many years now, and trying to manage all these complex passwords and password managers and MFA and all these things. People just kind of like throw their hands up and say, it's too complicated. I'm just going to use, password spring summer 2022. Be sure to update your passwords, by the way, everybody. Also, everybody push your favorite password in the comments below. I'm kind of curious to see what everybody's using nowadays.
Nice.
So we can.
Your top three
I need to
passwords,
change
put them in
mine,
the
so that would
comments.
be great. It would help me a
Sorry,
lot.
yeah.
You'll
I
help
need a
us
new
build
one.
our brute force list here. Thank you.
Yeah, but
Hey.
it's a cool idea for sure. But I can see some other challenges now about SIM swapping becoming really relevant now, and like getting access to the phones themselves and whatnot. So it raises different challenges, but I do think it's a step in the right direction for sure. So
Right. Yeah.
Physical access is root access. You got to protect that.
That's us. Yeah, I was about to say it really just changes the landscape and the attack surface for attackers. Like password-based phishing techniques or credential gathering techniques are just not going to be as relevant with this type of technology. It's going to shift back more into action-based types of attacks like wire fraud, VEC, or even file interactions and whatnot, as opposed to trying to harvest credentials. Because in this case,
right.
You're not going to be able to, because the design is as such that you cannot actually access or remove the private key that's in the device. So as the end user, you will never actually see the private key that you own or interact with it. So it's almost like for your own good type of thing. We're not revealing this to you, and it's tied to your hardware. So in a sense, yeah, we no longer can really. This really mitigates a lot of those landing pages that just harvest credentials and all those collected credentials from data breaches kind of become irrelevant. And we've seen in the past 2 years, those have probably been some of the most rampant forms of attacks. So this is almost like, even though it is you see the collaboration, it's almost like a necessary kind of evolution of security. As soon as the implementation is such that user accessibility is easy and seamless, and by default, I think it'll be we'll probably see this standard in the next few years become widely adopted, in my opinion. Especially
Well, I'm
with
also curious. Oftentimes, better security enables better privacy, and as a privacy advocate personally, I think that that's really great. But there's also situations where increased or improved security can impede personal privacy. And I'm curious now, this is a federated identity online. Is this one identity that I have, which authenticates me to all systems and all services? And does that mean that all services and systems know me as the same identity? Because in my personal life, I prefer to have different personas. My bank knows me as my real name, of course, but the video game forum that I log into knows me as a handle. And I think that there's a lot of value in separating parts of your life, compartmentalizing, because if one area is compromised, then it's harder for that to spill over into another area of your life. That's also good in business also. So I'm curious if that means from a personal consumer standpoint, I now have a one ID that identifies me to everyone, and then they validate and authenticate who that is. That's a kind of a concerning proposition.
Well, it means you'll be verified on Twitter instantly.
Right. Yeah, that's true. The burner phone market's about to get real hot. Let's just say that.
Right.
Right.
Start buying stock in that.
Right. Yeah. No, but I mean that's a great point. Like you're sacrificing some privacy here, right? You're basically tying yourself to a device and a globally registered database, and confirming all action related to that device is tied to whoever your personal identity is. So
And so for
that can be
most,
taken. you could easily take that
For
a
most
step further, right?
activities, that's going to be fine, and
Yeah.
that's probably most appropriate. For some business that is dealing with highly confidential information, or a person who needs to keep their online access secret from an ex-lover or something like that, perhaps this is not a solution for that part of their life or that part of their business.
Right. Right. So I think picking
Cool.
and choosing your lane here
It's a
will make
complicated
difference.
problem to solve. It's good that we're making progress.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like you said, it's a step in the right direction, and it'll also be interesting to see like which apps kind of support it first, meaning more consumer apps or more like business level apps. I think you're going to see a mix of both, and probably more of these, SaaS based type companies and larger, companies that already have some deep integrations, right? Like a good example might be for our listeners is like, hey, when you go to a certain website to like buy something, it might say, oh, check out with Apple Pay, even on the website's not affiliated with Apple or PayPal. Like you can click through that identity and check out faster, so to speak, versus creating some new online account that you're like, I don't want to have a throwaway account for some random website you're buying something one off from. So interesting, interesting where things are going.
Where it would be very beneficial though is for things like EDRs that we were talking about earlier, their emergency data requests. It's like, well, now we don't need a repository of authorized users. We have a repository of authorized devices, and then those, in theory, only a select amount of users could actually comply with or to be able to use those devices. So it wouldn't necessarily mitigate it on the end of the person receiving the EDR request, but it should limit the amount of bogus ones quite significantly if they're only able to be sent from certain devices. So then it will come down to like, well, how good is the device spoofing? Because you can easily spoof an email, but it's a lot harder to spoof hardware.
That's true.
I wouldn't say it's easy to spoof an email, by the way, but it's more simple than spoofing hardware in some cases.
But what's that clone my MAC address feature on my Linksys router for?
Yeah.
There you go. Bypassing all those firewall rules.
That's right.
We may be in bad shape. It's just MAC address based.
Just make it all Fs. All Fs. There you go.
There you go.
Yep.
Awesome. That's our tech tip for the day, everybody. Just kidding.
Yep.
So I think with that, guys, we had a great some great conversations, great content today. Be sure to like, subscribe, follow, share us, follow us on social media, and I think with that, anybody have closing thoughts?
No. Yeah. Great one, guys. See you next time.
All right.
Stay safe in cyberspace.
That's right. Change that password.
See y'all. All right. Take care. Bye-bye.